Good morning, everybody, and thank you very much for joining us at the Informed Perspective for yet another podcast. Today, we're going to be diving into a topic that touches every single one of us, everybody on this planet, and that is sleep. Jennie and I would like to explore this, having touched upon it in previous conversations. We wanted to know really about how sleep affects us and hear from some experts. So whether it's the newborn stage, chronic illness, anxiety, burnout, or simply life itself, so many of us struggle to get the rest that we need. So whether you're a new parent or you're managing chronic fatigue or just lying awake at 3 a.m. wondering what's wrong, we hope that this conversation today might remind you that there is a way back to rest. So how crazy is this? A typical person spends more than 20 years in a state of dreamy semi-consciousness. That's quite a long time. But sleep is not just a time for rest. It's a crucial process where our bodies and our brains do some of their most important work. During sleep, our brains reset, clear out harmful toxins, and strengthen memories and process new information. And it's not just about mental health. Deep sleep helps regulate hormones, it boosts immunity, and even lowers the risk of chronic diseases like heart disease and cancer. Sleep's not just a time for rest, it's that crucial process. Essentially, sleep is where our bodies do key maintenance work that we can't do while we're awake. It's more than just recharging, it's how we stay healthy, sharp, and ready to take on the world. We have a lot to talk about today, but to get the ball rolling, I wanted to mention a recent study that I found published in the Journal of Clinical Sleep Medicine, published in March of this year, which I just happened to come across. The study by Gavon Chow and al. Entitled Lower Slow Wave Sleep and REM Sleep are associated with brain atrophy of Alzheimer's vulnerable regions. And in this study, it found that sleep deprivation is linked to brain atrophy and may increase the risk of Alzheimer's. So this is a good incentive, having read this study, to think about sorting out your sleep. Sleep's essential for everyone, as we know, and especially for children. It supports growth, strengthens the immune system, and helps the brain process and store information. When children don't get enough sleep, the effects are obvious, as many of us may well be able to attest to. A survey from the American Academy of Sleep Medicine from September 2024, with 2,006 participants, found that parents reported noticeable changes in their children when sleep deprived. 58% noticed mood changes in their children, 49% saw attitudes and behavior shifts, 44% observed drops in energy, and 30% said it impacted the academic performance of their child. National health initiatives like Healthy People 2030 in the US are now emphasizing sleep as a key priority to help increase the number of kids and teens getting enough rest. In the UK, February of this year, the sleep charity launched Children's Sleep Awareness Month, aimed to raise awareness about the importance of sleep for children, especially considering that up to 50% of children experience sleep difficulty at some point, with the figure even rising to 80% amongst those with special educational needs and disabilities. So there are a few things there, just might get the ball rolling. And as always, we start every podcast with a few quotes. Laurie Colwin, the American author, said, "We need time to diffuse, to contemplate. And just as in sleep, our brains relax and give us dreams. So at some time in the day, we need to disconnect, reconnect, and look around us." So also making us think that those moments during the day are also valuable to have a pause potentially. Ryan Hurd, another sleep expert, sleep deprivation is an illegal torture method outlawed by the Geneva Convention and international courts, but most of us do it to ourselves. And Gandhi, "Every night when I go to sleep, I die. And the next morning, when I wake up, I am reborn." So, Jennie, I will now hand over to you to introduce our lovely speakers today.
Thank you, Penny. So today we're joined by three incredible women whose personal experiences and professional expertise bring real insight into how we can all heal our relationship with sleep. Firstly, Sinead Davin is a newborn care specialist and parental support coach. She's been nurturing and supporting families for over 25 years. Most recently, Sinead's joined Instagram and shares her story of the care she provides, and it's lovely to see the moments where she's giving parents, some respite and to give some sleep. So we can't wait to hear from her of her views on sleep and the importance. Tracy Hannigan is a qualified sleep therapist who specialises in adult insomnia. Using only evidence-based approaches, she helps people not only reconnect to their natural ability to sleep, but to be able to have resilient sleep for a lifetime. And Janie Perry is a naturopath, nutritional therapist, and wellbeing coach with over a decade of experience supporting people through chronic health challenges like ME and CFS. After overcoming chronic fatigue syndrome herself, Janie brings a unique blend of clinical expertise, yoga practice, and lived experience to her work. Based in West Sussex, she's passionate about helping others to regain their health through nutrition, natural therapies, and restoring balance to body and mind.
So without further ado, we're going to dive in and go to Tracy first of all. Good morning, Tracy, and thank you for joining us.
Good morning. Thank you for having me here.
Great. So your first question today, you've experienced insomnia on such a deep level in your life, both personally and professionally. Can you share a little bit about what that journey has been like for you?
Well, the journeys are definitely intertwined. I was always interested in health and well-being, actually studied pre-medicine and dropped out in my last year because I realized I really didn't want to go to medical school for a variety of reasons. Went and trained in psychology and worked in community mental health. And obviously there is a very well-established bi-directional relationship between sleep issues and mental health and some learning issues as well. So it was certainly sleep was a present thing. I also happened to go through a bout of insomnia after the death of my first husband. You would expect that you would have rough sleep after something like that, but it went on for many years. And I didn't realize kind of what got me out of it until kind of much later after I went through my second bout. So fast forward, met someone, moved to the UK and trained as an osteopath and working in pain settings again on the professional side, seeing the intersection between people who are experiencing persistent pain and sleeping issues. And because of my personal experience with a second bout of insomnia and kind of moving through it, I thought I really wanted to know more about this from a professional point of view, because I had also that empathy for people who were really struggling. And my bent has always been to go with kind of evidence-based approaches. And so I trained in sleep therapy, essentially, cognitive behavioral therapy for insomnia and acceptance and commitment therapy. So those two elements wove themselves together and brought me to where I am today. And it's such rewarding work. You know, people who are having difficulty with sleep kind of focus on, I'm not getting the number of hours that I want, or make me feel good, because that's the population of people who tend to come to me. But I really love seeing the transformation in people when they recognize it's not about the hours in and of themselves. It's really about refocusing and reconnecting to those things that they love doing in their life, and actually learning that they can do that before their sleep completely recovers. It really floats my boat, I guess.
Yeah, so the psychology is hugely important then in the impact that it has on your sleep and your well-being, right?
Absolutely. It's the difference between people who go through an event, a negative event oftentimes, but sometimes just really positive, exciting events, and they return to sleeping well, right? So those people don't look at the sleeplessness as a problem or as a threat, but people who might be more inclined, and this is where the mental health side comes in, or the perfectionism side comes in, that group of people can have that experience, but then become very fixated and focused on the sleeping issue itself. And then that gets them stuck in a bit of a cycle, because we are not built to be able to sleep when we're under threat. And so if we're perceiving sleeplessness as a threat, we get stuck. And it's unsticking that piece and teaching people to kind of roll with that flow from a mindset and psychology point of view that helps us deal with future sleeplessness when it comes up, because it will for everybody.
Yeah, isn't that so interesting? It's the threat, and also that you mentioned the excitement as well. And I was just sort of thinking then of like Christmas, actually. I was thinking of like Christmas Eve, and then as a child, like not being able to sleep the whole night because of Father Christmas, just that thought, or when you're going on holiday as well, the night before, and you're potentially, so it's a kind of intermingle though, isn't it? Often with the excitement, there's also, it's not necessarily a threat, but there is a tension. Yeah, that then, you know, in your subconscious somehow is then, you know, disturbing your
Yeah.
sleep.
Yeah, and there's a difference between like that short-term sleeplessness and the kind of getting stuck in the cycle sleeplessness. So just a simple example of one that's a really kind of exciting thing. I spoke to a woman once who went on her first really big trip abroad, and like the jet lag was like 9 hours. And of course, she didn't sleep very well, because you would expect that would, you know, you wouldn't sleep very well, some 9 hour time difference. And rather than understanding that that was sort of an expected thing, she panicked about it. Well, actually, she recognized mentally, like rationally, jet lag is this, but it struck this chord of fear and anxiety in her, and she got stuck in that loop, of fearing the lack of sleep, which of course made the adjustment much more difficult, and it became very persistent. And actually, we worked together after she got back from her trip, specifically on that mindset piece.
I think that mindset's exactly the important part, isn't it? Because if you talk about the pressure or the threat or the excitement, that's all in your mind, but actually it's what you need to do with your body to help, you know, your mind understand or get over it or work through it or guide it into the right place that it needs to be.
Yeah, we can tilt the biology and we can tilt the psychology to kind of create an optimal kind of playing field for sleep to return. But I think because we have a negativity bias that creeps in, especially when, you know, we're not at 100%, our basic brain, the very core of our brain, is going into survival mode. And so it's looking for threats all the time, which then layers it on. Being able to kind of step back from that is really important.
Does anyone have anything they want to add? Does this show up in with any of your clients or the families you work with? Janie?
Yeah, thank you, Tracy. That was really interesting of you sharing that. Just wanted to add on to in the chronic fatigue, MEs of picture, and often in high anxiety as well, people are getting stuck in sympathetic dominance, as we would call it. So stuck on that sympathetic side of the nervous system, which is the fight and flight, where it's fight and flight. They're not going to rest in that place, and often it's observed sort of when people are stuck in sort of an anxiety loop, so the mind's going round and round like a washing machine almost. So how to interrupt that cycle, and that's where tools of meditation, breath work can all really help to get the clients back into their bodies and out of their head. So absolutely resonated what Tracy said about being stuck in fear mode as well. So yeah, thank you, Tracy. It's interesting.
A lot of the challenges that we're mentioning makes me think of the new parent stage. Sinead, how does that show up with the families you work, like anxiety and the pressure you put on yourself?
I think everything is anxiety induced for new mums. We're in such a state of shock and trauma quite often after a birth, and actually control as well. I think a lot of the parents, the biggest issue they have is that they can't control this new person in front of them, and therefore that leads on to sleep deprivation. Anxiety and sleep deprivation is just one big messy loop. So yeah, I mean, yeah, it's a big deal. I think when you first bring a baby home, you're in survival mode, and we all have this picture of how things are going to play out when you bring your baby home, and it's a shock when it's nothing like that. And it's actually just baby steps, literally each kind of hour of the day, getting through that, and trying to gain some control over this little human that you've brought home. Yeah. So
it's also the 24/7, isn't it? Because that's something completely new, that somebody is reliant on you at any time. There isn't like I go home from my job or whatever else. It's that complete, and that's where it messes then with your sleep, because your whole body's on, like you say, that fight and flight the whole time. So you're never
100%.
coming down.
Yeah, and that is such a big deal, and it's fascinating. Time and time again, I see just how different it is for men and women, and it fascinates me. I'm really into psychology, so I just sit there and I take it all in, but it never changes. Women have grown a human and given birth, so hormonally and everything, we are so connected to that baby. So we find strength and reserves from somewhere to get through the sleep deprivation, whereas dads really struggle. They really struggle, and the mums are always eye rolling and like, you know, kind of frustrated, but they've not birthed the baby, so they're not dealing with the same kind of issues. So interestingly, it's all the dad's first question is always, what do we need to do to get this baby to sleep? And mums are always anxiety based, like, you know, is this normal, is that normal, kind of thing. But yeah, of course there are things you can do to kind of encourage sleep, but literally every baby is different, and you know, they're not textbooks.
And that's why your role's so vital, Sinead, but we'll come on to that. But I'm so glad actually that you mentioned men. So we've got a bit of an ongoing chuckle, but we really struggle to get men involved in the podcast, not for any block. Women are just a bit more responsive, maybe we come across them more. And we often broach the subject of men in a podcast, promise that we'll spend a bit more time, but kind of never get to it. So we're making a real effort at the Informed Perspective to have some, well, invite men along for their perspective, also to do some topics that is just for men. So obviously there's a big, you know, focus on masculinity at the moment and the pressures of that. But when you first mentioned the dads, Sinead, I thought you were, my negative bias set in, and I thought you were going to say, oh, they can sort of sleep fine, they sleep through it all, they're not anxiety driven. And I'm so glad to hear that informed perspective that you've got, because actually they aren't biologically prepared for it. It is and yes, they can be sleep deprived, but it's often overlooked the mental struggles that men have and the mental health after having a baby, and the, you know, male parental the male postnatal depression is quite common, and that's often overlooked because you just think, oh, you haven't got that kind of all these bodily changes, but your world has changed, you are sleep deprived, you've got this added responsibility, and maybe they are at a disadvantage, as you touched on, because there's been no biological preparation.
I think there's a massive disadvantage, and actually a client of mine that I was with last year, she took me aside and she said, thank you so much for asking her partner how he's doing after the birth of the baby, because so many people don't. She said, everyone fusses over me, but he came to me and really appreciated the fact that I'd asked him how he was, because their entire life changed, and their partner that they, you know, have known for however long has totally changed and is going through, you know, so many different things. And they, I mean, men always feel a little bit useless around us anyway. And then, you know, suddenly there's this baby and they probably don't know what they're doing. Women don't always know what they're doing either, but somehow we kind of take the lead, I think, because biologically we've given birth and stuff. But yeah, it's mind-blowing really just how much goes on for parents and their anxieties and all of that. Yeah.
I'm so glad you raised it, because it's also a really good example of the difference between a hyperarousal type of situation that's feeding a sleeplessness problem and sleep deprivation, because we can be deprived of sleep without having that hyperarousal that actually kind of helps us stay functional during the daytime. And that's a big difference between things like insomnia and all of the other sleep disorders. The others don't have the hyperarousal, so those tend to be characterized by excessive sleepiness during the day. When I know a lot of people with insomnia would do anything for a nap, but they just can't get there. And so the dad's suffering from the that reminds me of the quote earlier, the torture of the sleep deprivation, because they don't have that additional thing to kind of help combat that sleepiness, and that it's a different kind of fatigue. Neither situation's ideal, but it was such a good example of those differences present in the same household.
Yeah.
Could you just
sorry, carry on.
Just before I just want to, just for our listeners, because when we first spoke to you, Tracy, it really opened my mind, this concept of hyperarousal. Could you just explain just the basics of what that is in terms of sleep, just so anyone listening is clear?
We all have a state of arousal. You can actually measure it on the Glasgow coma scale. So it's everything from being in a coma to being unconscious to being asleep to being awake to being hyper aroused, it's a biological and psychological phenomenon where we are wired. It is that fight and flight. We are prepared. We have a higher heart rate. We have higher blood pressure. Our eyes are more sensitive to light. We have an increased negativity bias. It gives us that tired and wired feeling as opposed to that sleepy feeling. And Janie was describing it as kind of being stuck in that sympathetic arousal sympathetic loop, and that's exactly what that is.
Amazing, thank you.
Sorry,
Sinead.
Sinead, did you want to say something?
Oh, it's just interesting because I was just wondering whether that also, there's a lot on social media now about wake windows for babies and about sleep pressure. I'd never heard about sleep pressure until this year, and I just wondered whether that's relevant as well for new babies, what you were saying, Tracy.
Yeah, the difference between a baby and an adult when it comes to sleep pressure and sleep drive is it takes little tiny infants almost no time at all to develop enough sleep drive to sleep. Whereas if you're, as we get older, it takes longer and takes more physical activity to kind of build that sleep pressure. In terms of sleep-wake windows, I don't work with little children, but I think some of the same other kinds of principles apply in terms of conditioning. So we have a bed, we tend to sleep in it. We have an association with the bed, physical and psychological, that says, I just sleep here. And it's usually unconscious because we don't think about it very much. Then we get up, we go off and we live our life and we do our stuff. Then we come back and we go, woo, I'm sleepy, and we go to bed. It's only that association becomes different when people spend a lot of time in this either sleepless, but particularly a hyper aroused or a worried state. And the brain and the body say, okay, well, I go to work and then I make dinner and then I watch television, then I get in bed and then I solve all the problems of the world. And it becomes a cue for all of that. And so my understanding of what some people do who are trained in working with babies is they look at those kinds of associations and help the parents look at those associations. What is helping that child kind of not, I guess, need to be attached at some point. They're little, right? We got to give them that. Yeah. They came from the inside to the outside. And I'm definitely not a fan of the whole let them scream it out thing, right? So there are different ways of doing that can help create healthy associations that don't create abandonment and all that other sort of stuff. Yeah.
And I feel like social media now has such a negative impact on new mums because ultimately they're alone with their baby, so they're scrolling, and every single video is you should be doing this, you shouldn't be doing that. And there's every thread has endless comments saying, well, I don't know what the issue is. I did sleep training and I did this and that for my baby and they sleep fine, and you're spoiling your baby, all those kind of old school comments. But actually it's only, I know America and England tend to really be the only places where we expect a baby to go from birth into a crib and sleep independently. And it's craziness, isn't it?
Yes. I mean, and then you can extend that out. There are, when I think about my friends and their expectations for what kind of house they should be aiming to live in. Well, if you've got 5 kids, you need 5 bedrooms. Well, my mother did just fine, thank you very much, in a family of 7, and all the boys shared a room and all the girls shared a room. You know, it
And then every
in the
child's
Hispanic
different, right?
cultural expectation. Sorry?
I would say every child is also different. So I have 3, and I would say that the first one, relatively soon, because he just slept so well, I could put him into his own room and he could sleep, and he never demanded it. The other 2 are still in my bed, you know? So again, it's that sort of, you know what works for you with your baby, right? As opposed to, and then having that pressure, like my mother saying to me then at the time, sort of, you know, you must put it into the room and you must shut the door and whatever. Did not work. When the child was with me, baby was falling asleep straight away. There was no problem at all. And that was much easier for me to manage because then I could sleep, right?
Absolutely. I always recommend a sling. I think like my biggest advice when parents first come to me for help, obviously, generally speaking, when they come to me for help, it's because they're exhausted. I think what I provide is more than a night's sleep. It's actually the moral support. And I teach them how to read their baby more than anything. And suddenly it's like, okay, so everything feels a little bit more manageable when you can see your baby's cues and see what's going on and have someone saying, no, you're right, that is a tired cue, or no, that's hunger, no, that's wind. And sometimes that's actually all it takes, rather than, you know, all this sleep training stuff. And the other thing, while I'm on the sleep training train, is that there are many sleep training techniques that aren't harmful to the emotional well-being of the baby. There are really lovely, gentle, holistic ways to get you encouraged sleep without kind of abandonment. So Elizabeth Pantley does her book when I did my maternity nurse training, and that was one of the books we studied. And she does pick up, put down, and that is when a baby, so you try to settle them, obviously make sure they're well fed, etc., and you try to settle them in a crib or wherever they're sleeping. And as soon as they cry, you lift them to teach them that, you know, when they cry, you're there. However, you do bum patting, hand on chest, shushing, hand on the head can be really comforting for babies. And you are there to respond to their needs. Another one is the chair method, where you do the same, but when the baby stirs, you have a chair beside their crib and you just reach in, and eventually your shushes, as your chair moves towards the door, you know, they hear you, and they do learn. But, you know, there's this thing now where I've got 2-week-old babies, and their parents are saying, you know, shouldn't she be sleeping in her bed by now? And, you know, it's just like, no, they want to be attached. Just go with it, you know.
And I mean, before we move on, I mean, we could talk about it for ages. It's the societal pressures that have been built, and this plethora of information that's out there from every realm. And it's just a bit of a shout out to what you're doing on social media, Sinead. But I just love that the perspective that you can give behind closed doors to families, like you said, about about these cues and how to understand your baby and discover the baby together with some extra support. But also, you know, on your Instagram as well, you call out when there's it's not misinformation, but actually if people are saying extremes, and, you know, there's been a lot of trolling of some people that you've stood up to as well, but actually saying there's completely different ways of doing things. You know, there's people can take this route, people can take that route, and actually I really like you're in the middle and you're aware of all of them and just trying to get people to keep it calm.
Thank you. Yeah. Well, I feel like, you know, for some families, they need 8 hours of sleep. Mentally, they cannot cope without it. So for those people, you know, they have taken sterner methods. For instance, I look after a lot of twins. Twin mums would not survive if they didn't become a little bit less baby led and more kind of slightly more routined. And that's okay. And if you do want to breastfeed and co-sleep and have no routine, that's also amazing. Like whatever you can do is the best you're doing for your baby. And again, you know, if you've got 4 children, each one might need something different. So yeah, it's just about reading your baby. I try to be fair. So thank you.
So Tracy, while we were talking about sort of methods of going back to sleep, I was going to ask you, are there any tools or practices that you would recommend for adults now if they're waking up, say, at 3 a.m. in the morning on a regular basis? How do you approach people who are struggling like that?
Depends on what's happening during that period of time, because it is quite normal to wake up and to go back to sleep. But if people are awake for hours and hours, we can look at sleep, some of the sleep structure. So if somebody's able to generate 8 hours of sleep, but they are spending 12 hours in bed because they want to, or they don't have to do something else or whatever, what happens is the brain says, oh, I can create this 8 hours of sleep biologically, but now I'm going to spread it out over 12 hours. And so you might have wake ups. So we look at some of those basic things. And the way to sort that out from a purely biological point of view is to don't be in bed for 12 hours, be in bed closer to the amount of time that you're able to generate. There are safety standards. Obviously, if somebody's getting 4 hours of sleep, you're not going to suggest that they spend only 4 hours in bed. So it's much more nuanced than that. But we look at the biological bits to build that sleep drive and that sleep pressure that we were talking about. And then once that is sorted out, we look at what is happening in the night. Is it frustration about being awake that is contributing to that person being awake? Is it worry and rumination about what happened the day before, or what happened 15 years ago, or what might happen next week? There are different approaches for dealing with different aspects of that. Sometimes it's helpful to get up, do a pace of the house, go do something else to kind of switch on our executive function. Again, that negativity bias with our rational self half asleep, we can imagine something that seems really, really big. And then we wake up in the next morning and we go, oh, that actually wasn't that big of a thing, was it? even I do that, right? And that is simply because of how our brain works at night. So doing that can help settle some of that. And then you go back to bed when you're sleepy. We use this as an opportunity to do a very behaviorist thing, which is associating the bed with sleepy feelings. The reality is we're all going to spend time awake at night. And how can we have a nice, calm experience about it instead of one that trains our brain that we're here to solve all these problems? For frustration, paradoxical intention is a really good technique. And you're essentially telling yourself, it works on this basis. If you're at a club dancing at 2 a.m, you want to be awake. Being awake at 2 a.m. is a good thing. But if you're at home and you have to get up at 6 or 7 to go to work, you don't want to be awake at 2 a.m. The being awake is a neutral event. It's the overlay that we give it that is creating the frustration. So we just manage the frustration with paradoxical intention. We essentially say, instead of, oh, I really need to get to sleep, I have to get to sleep, everything's going to go wrong tomorrow if I don't get to, puts too much pressure on it, we say, actually, I'm safe, I am okay. We might do some things like breath work, like breathing out for longer than we breathe in to kind of slow our heart rate, because we get hot and that makes it harder to sleep. And we say to ourselves, I am okay resting here and being awake for 1 more minute, which is the opposite of what builds the frustration. It's almost like minute by minute acceptance of a situation that we're not content with can help bring that frustration down. If it's overflow from the day or rumination, there are different approaches depending on the content. When I talk to people about sleep, I talk about how the sleep cycle doesn't begin during your quote unquote wind down. It begins when you get up in the morning. That anchors your circadian rhythm. We do things like light, food, and movement, all things that are opposite of what, so it's saying this is the daytime now, this is the line where the day begins. And that we also begins the building of sleep pressure. So we begin building sleep pressure, we anchor our circadian rhythm so that we regulate our energy a little bit better during the day. Those things are important for everybody if people are starting to have sort of sleep wobbles. And those things get missed out. That's different than sleep hygiene. There's a difference between having a blind that keeps the light out when the headlights come by, and a person who takes their blackout blinds and tapes them to the side of the window to keep all the photons of light out. The fear of the light and what it means for them is keeping them awake in that instance. But starting that day in that way and learning to compartmentalize it, particularly compartmentalizing, the closing of the laptop, almost ritualizing, leaving the work, especially once a lot of us are working from home. We don't have like the context switch like we might have if we're in an office. Close that laptop, create ritual around compartmentalizing all of the daytime stuff and switching into family and self mode. Those kinds of things can be really helpful to prevent overflow into that space at night.
And that's so interesting that with like the more mobility we've got through our like mobile devices, there is that tendency now, and I'm sure maybe some of you as well, that you might take your laptop into your bed to do some work, or, you know, I do, or, you know, on your phone or whatever. And that used to be that solid sort of divide, right? You work on your computer and then you'd go to your bedroom and then you'd go to bed. And many people also having TVs in their bedrooms as well. So I think that's really important, really interesting that that's a huge impact, right?
And there's a big difference.
Tell me off now.
No, it's a big difference between TV and social media, for example, because television, if you're just watching television, I'm not talking about YouTube because that's different, because anything algorithmic, like social media, like YouTube, it's designed to keep you hooked into doing it. All the notifications, it's like playing a game with your phone. Oh, it bings. I feel like I have to press that button to see what it is. You don't actually have to. I've become a little bit of a tyrant with my phone. It's a tool for me rather than the other way around. I work with my clients a lot on, it's really okay to not respond to an email just because you see it at 1 a.m. And in fact, you don't need your phone in your room, you know, to you know, work with that temptation. But just taking the temptation away, that sometimes increases people's anxiety because they're like, I'm not responding to the notification. And I think we just have to, everybody's on this kind of instant gratification, tick, 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 you know, thing, you know, respond. If you don't get an email back in 2 hours, you get another one saying, did you get my email? Well, yes. I check my emails twice a day. That's it.
The culture of busyness, isn't it, as well? People are all just so proactive and busy now. But what jumped to mind, Tracy, when you said about the difference between like YouTube and TV, I actually think there are TV, like Netflix is algorithm. Well, it's not algorithm based, but it's what you like, and the series just roll, the episodes just roll into the next one. You know, it's completely different to the traditional TV we had, and I'm getting more and more confident that my screen time for my children is actually Netflix, because it's like it's as addictive, becoming as addictive as.
Oh, absolutely. I'll binge a box set. Really easy. I'm talking about old-fashioned TV where you're scrolling through the channels.
It finishes, and you know, there's just nothing decent on. Anyway, move on.
So Janie, I would like to bring you as well now into the conversation because you've been very quiet.
Hi, just listening. No, it's fascinating, and wish I'd known about Sinead when I had my daughter.
Me too.
Yes, me too, absolutely. And just the feeling you could go off in any direction and talk for hours on end, right? But I just wanted to make sure that we also drop in and talk a bit about nutrition as well, because I think we've spoken about that previously, and that's a huge part as well of the whole picture when it comes to well-being and sleep. And I know that you've spoken lots about that, and I would like really just you to give us a bit of information about that. Can you explain a bit more about the nutrition and how that affects our sleep?
Yeah, and I think it really slots really nicely along with what Tracy was sharing. So it is a big part. One of the things I was going to just sort of mention, it was about the circadian rhythm and how important that is, and Tracy's touched on that. And that one of the tips I give my clients if they're having the sleep issues is about, you know, getting up when you wake up if you can, or at least sitting up. Sometimes if they're in fatigue, they have the habit of very much sitting in bed, and that's sort of a habit we want to sort of slowly shift. So I encourage that. We'll sit up and open the curtains and allow the light, because that's stimulating your pineal gland, which is helping to start the kind of wake up hormone production, which is really, really important. So opening the curtains and getting natural sunlight first thing, and not the blue screen. So just touched on the screens and how that can impact on the nervous system and dysregulate that, absolutely. So from the food perspective, one of the foundations, sort of the food foundations that I really do my best to educate my clients on, is about blood sugar balancing. And what can happen if our blood sugar is very imbalanced, then it can be one of the triggers that wakes us up at night. So we might be hungry, or our blood sugars might get low, and then it stimulates us to wake up, because we then we need a bit more glucose in our blood to be operating, to be doing the jobs the body does overnight. So basic blood sugar balance is a real important starting point, and I cover that in detail on my Food Foundations course that I'm launching. There's obviously key things that are crucial. If you're struggling with sleep, the caffeine has got to go, or at least be reduced slowly. I've had people come to me and they're on sleep medications, but they're still on 10 cups of coffee a day. I mean, where does that add up? I don't know. So it's just, it's common sense, isn't it, really? We know caffeine is a stimulant that's stimulating the nervous system, stimulating the blood flow. It affects people's sleep, absolutely. The same as alcohol can affect people's sleep. It can also cause that waking at night. We've touched on the stress and anxiety. That can sometimes be a cause for people not going to sleep and waking up at night as well. And then come back to sort of blood sugar balancing. Often it's, if people are also having a lot of sugar or processed foods in their diet, that can again impact on. It's almost like you're kind of on an up and down, a real roller coaster of up and down with the high sugar and high processed foods. And again, it's about a balance. If you can do the healthy eating and balancing your blood sugars 80% of the time, 80-90% of the time, then you're going to get the results. But if you're kind of more 50-50, let's do some work on that to increase it. So a majority of the time, you are doing the healthy eating and keeping your blood sugars balanced. It's not about being a complete purist and never eating chocolate ever again or never having a cup of coffee. But what works for that person at the moment? What do they need to support them getting back to sleep and sleeping well? I think, Penny, you started the podcast today on with some great research on how sleep deprivation and how detrimental that is to our health, and especially to our brain health. Absolutely.
It's quite frightening, really, actually.
Isn't it? Yeah. And I think that the more the research, I've seen some of the research around the link between the sleep deprivation and the Alzheimer dementia picture later on. I'm slightly concerned. I've had a lot of sleep deprivation with my child. I need to speak to you more, Sinead. And then we come back onto things like, when to eat through the day. And obviously that's going to, again, depend on the person and their schedule. Are they do they work 9 to 5 or are they sort of 6 to 2? Are they a postman and they work really early? So it's going to be different for everyone. There isn't a set diet. There isn't a set routine for everyone. It'd be really easy if it was. But it's about, I very much encourage clients to learn what's best for them and what works for their body, and we do that through them keeping a bit of a food diary, not forever, for a couple of weeks, just to put a bit of a spotlight on it, and they become aware of, well, okay, that day that I had a bit more protein in my breakfast and lunch, my energy was better, my mood was better, and I slept through the night. Brilliant. Right, that's working for that person. They need a bit more protein. Someone else might need a bit more fat to nourish the brain health. Everyone's going to be different.
What about sleep-inducing foods? Because I'm sort of thinking about tryptophan, like turkey was one, right? That's one.
Yeah,
to be
absolutely.
going to sleep. Do you have any specific foods or supplements that you recommend to your clients?
Certainly. So tryptophan was the sort of next topic to come on
to
from a food perspective. You got in there, Penny. So tryptophan is an amino acid, and it's the precursor to melatonin and serotonin. So it's needed to actually be able to make your serotonin. It's like the raw ingredients. If you were making a cake, you need certain ingredients.
You happy?
So yeah, chicken and turkey and many proteins are high in that amino acid. Nuts and seeds are another source, a good source. And some of the more kind of complex carbohydrates, the sort of more whole grains, the oats and brown rice and quinoa or quinoa, depending on how you like to pronounce that one, is also really beneficial to that tryptophan production.
Okay, what about the glass of milk at bedtime that, like my mother always said, if you couldn't sleep, have your glass of milk? Where do you stand in that?
You know what? If you're dairy sensitive, absolutely not. Sometimes it's part of the ritual, isn't it? It's something that certainly children kind of get into that habit. I breastfed my daughter for quite a long time, so she still loves a cup of milk before bed. It's just part of our ritual that we have, and sometimes it's warm milk, and it's obviously a comfort. So I think that's can be part of a ritual. So whether that's chamomile tea works, chamomile tea or nighttime teas is something that I personally quite enjoy, and that's part of my sort of nighttime ritual. I have one of those in the evening. There is something in milk, and it's more raw and full fat milk, that stimulates the, I can't remember I haven't written that one down for today, but there is something, and I'll have to come back to you on the detail of that, but there is something in that raw full fat milk that stimulates the brain and the sleep. So for some people it can, but it's about the quality of the milk. So I think that's really important, and that's sometimes difficult to get that quality of milk that is needed for that kind of biochemical process, for it actually to have that impact on the brain and starting off that melatonin production. But there is something there, absolutely.
Do you ever prescribe or suggest melatonin as a supplement?
Okay, so in the UK, as a BANT registered nutritional therapist, we're not allowed to prescribe or recommend melatonin as such. I would then refer someone to their GP to see if they can get melatonin, and GPs can prescribe it in some cases up to, I think it's 3 milligrams in the UK.
You can't buy it over the counter then?
No.
You can't in the UK.
Oh, really?
No. Obviously, it is available online. And that's people's choice if they do that. As a nutritional therapist, I'm not allowed to do that. I want to say it can be beneficial for some. I know that some clients come to me and they're already on it, so that's their choice, and they found it really beneficial. So
does that help them just to get to sleep, or is it interfering then later with the cycles? I'm just curious if it's just getting to sleep, but then actually it's messing them up further down the line.
Yeah, again, it's very individual. For some people it's worked really well because they've struggled to get to sleep and stay asleep, so by increasing that melatonin in the body, and there's other ways to do that rather than just taking melatonin. So but for others, if they've taken it for a while, they've really struggled to come off of it, which people often will do if they're on sleep medication. They then really struggle to come off it because they've been so reliant on it. I've got many clients that have been on it for years. And it's really hard to then make that shift. Tracy's nodding there as well.
That psychological dependence is massive.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, if people are having sleep issues, try the natural approach first. Try the foods, do the balancing your blood sugars, bring in the kind of sleep hygiene routines, get rid of the screens before 9 o'clock or 2 hours before bed, ideally. And do some of these rituals, absolutely. Bring in the teas. And from a sort of supplement perspective, magnesium is one of the most sort of simple things that people can bring in. Magnesium is a relaxing mineral and is really needed often in the sleep picture. It's also very depleted in our soils. Farming production, it doesn't allow that rest time for the soil, so it's very depleted in the soil. So it's very depleted in the food chain, hence the need for supplementation.
It's I put my hands up with excitement with the magnesium, and this is what I love about the work that Penny and I are doing and why we want to share it so much, is that you can just continually learn. Like, I've been struggling with my toddler. He's not a toddler, he's 5 next month, his sleep for ages. And it's like you when they're babies, you look at the cues. Have they had their milk? Is their nappy changed? Are they, or you look at what's gone on with them because they can't tell you. And I kind of just stopped doing that with my son. And he wasn't eating very well. So, he was probably waking up hungry. He was waking up hungry. I was exploring some, and I discovered magnesium, but he won't take like medicines or a supplement. I didn't do enough research on the bath salts, but I thought it might be but the natural absorption into the skin. So I've got a magnesium oil, and I'm going to go quiet now because I never comment on his sleep, because then it just throws it into disarray. But you can tell by my excitement and my discovery of magnesium that the result of it has been positive. I'm not going to say any more. But it just, I would never have known about it. And I loved it when, you know, it's what your body needs, and it's the cues and understanding what you might be getting and what you might not be getting. So that's just a personal experience I wanted to share, but I just always so timely because I've only discovered it in the last couple of months.
Isn't it exciting? And there's so many different forms. So there's lots, about 6-7 different forms of magnesium supplementation. And from a sleep perspective, magnesium taurate can be particularly helpful. And magnesium glycinate or bisglycinate can also be really easy for us to absorb. But getting it in through baths and magnesium salts in the baths is another way. Oils, creams, lotions, there's lots of different things. And for children, that can work really well. There's also powder forms and liquid forms that you can take supplementary. So that is another way of getting it in with children. Also hugely, magnesium is one of the minerals that's used in over 200 processes in our body, or biochemical processes in our body. So it's not surprising that it's quite depleted as well, especially kind of in the sort of perimenopausal picture, menopausal picture, if that's some of your listeners. Magnesium is one of the basics to bring in, and it's usually okay to take alongside things, but if anyone's on the medications, then always get advice from a healthcare practitioner or nutritional therapist on that. Other key supplementation, things like passion flower is really lovely, valerian, lavender. Another key amino acid which is really helpful is L-theanine. So again, it's kind of more of it's a precursor to some of the calming pathways. The GABA pathway is really helpful in that picture. Hops is another one to add in. And then there's something called 5-HTP. So this is on the sort of tryptophan and serotonin, melatonin pathway. So 5-hydrotryptophan, basically, I think is the full name of it. That can be used when someone's not on any sleep or antidepressant medications. And again, always check if you are taking medication. For your listeners, then please always check before you add a supplement in. If someone's on no medications, then it can be something. Magnesium and 5-HTP can be a really lovely place to start, because you're giving the body that raw ingredient to make its own melatonin. So this is where you don't necessarily have to prescribe the melatonin, but give it what it needs to make it, which is really helpful. Sorry, my dog's adding in her piece in the background.
Yeah, why not?
There's a key food. Kiwis are supposed to be very helpful for before bed. So that's helped some clients and not others. So again, it's that personal thing it comes back to. So
fascinating. So fascinating.
Tracy and Sinead, do you have any other foods or any supplements that additionally that you would recommend, or anything that works for you?
So there's supplements, or there's things that I advise clients to try to help with reflux and colic before they go to their GP, because generally speaking, it's not very helpful. They put them on Gaviscon, which just causes constipation, and then sometimes they get an omeprazole, but that has its negatives as well. So, it's a pro and con situation. But no, I mean, obviously for a newborn, it's all about feeding, and breastfed babies definitely have less kind of gastro issues than formula fed babies. And no, it's just really, honestly, every single job is all about wind and about a newborn baby's inability to burp and fart, basically. And their immature digestive system takes a couple of months, and then I always think by 12 weeks they tend to be able to do those things with a bit more ease, and everything calms down a bit then, and then another problem arises.
It's such core bodily function, isn't it? Digestion, and that effective digestion. And I also learned when I had 2 cesarean babies and they were colicky, and I don't know if this is, but because they aren't birthed through the natural birth canal, they're almost not straightened up. So they're kind of crunched in still, like the newborn fetal position.
Absolutely. The biggest thing as well is cranial osteopathy for newborn, to just make sure that, whether C-section babies or vaginal babies, either way, just to make sure that everything is okay, because sometimes they can't fart very well. And then a few kind of sessions with a cranial osteopath, and suddenly they can pass wind and everything is a little bit more manageable. So yeah, it's fascinating. And with toddlers, I always recommend a banana before bed. For some reason, I've seen that a banana before bed. Is there scientific reasons for that? Is it the
It can be
potassium?
helpful. Yeah, it can be helpful. It's a good source of some of the key carbohydrates. It's high in potassium, particularly. But yeah, it is. I think it is one of the ones on the list that can also help. So
That is genuinely what I throw Lucas when he's like, I'm hungry, when he should have been asleep.
Easy.
Yeah, like
Kitchen's closed.
yeah,
And then also
it's an easy one.
some people fart at night. Well, that's
Yeah.
sleeping, right?
That's
So
a
when you're
fart.
then relaxed.
Of course. And I find typically a baby sleeps in their deep sleep from kind of, I would say, from 8 till 3. And then the parents are like, they are just permanently wriggling. And I'm like, if you imagine that you were stationary for that long, like most humans, the first thing we do when we wake up in the morning or in that lighter sleep is fart. And they can't move to get it out themselves. So if you just lift them, move them, wriggle their body around, kind of a few bicycle froggy legs for the baby, they'll get those farts out. Cranial osteopath really helps you teach how to do that. And then, they're much happier and less grunty. So yeah.
Tracy, any gems, some tips?
So really interesting area. A lot of times if I've got a client who has little kids and they're all eating dinner at like 5 o'clock in the afternoon because they eat dinner together, which is lovely. Adding in a complex carbohydrate and protein snack before bed seems to be really, really helpful for that blood sugar regulation. We can, our liver and muscle only stores so much. It's much easier for the brain to wake us up. It's to say, mainline me some glucose, please. I'm not going to switch into a different energy system in the middle of the night. I'm not running a marathon or anything. So really, really, it's a good low hanging fruit opportunity for sure. And the magnesium one is really interesting. So I take magnesium, I take it in the morning, and I'm in a sleep CPD group run by, she's a sleep physician and psychiatrist, and is also integrative medicine specialist. She's from the States. And we had been talking about the melatonin dose response curve. And so, how to use things like melatonin, when to take it. Our dim light melatonin onset is usually much earlier than people actually take their melatonin. So I asked her, I said, is there a dose response curve for magnesium? Because I often see people come to me and they're not sleeping well, but they're on like 5 medications and 50,000 supplements, and they've got this really rigid routine, and they're kind of trapped in this space because they're also psychologically dependent on all of this stuff, because they feel like they've got to be doing something. And magnesium it's a universal one. So I asked her about this dose response curve, and she is, despite the, I guess, reputation that doctors only want to give medication, she's just very different. She's like, I don't go, even I approach supplements with caution as well because of the psychological dependence, but magnesium would be one that she would go to first. And she said you could take it in the morning. And it really reassured me, because one thing that happens if people are highly anxious about not sleeping, anything we do right before bed is going to be associated with a did I sleep or didn't I sleep, and can increase that psychological dependence. So I tried to encourage people to with that sort of thing to take it earlier in the day, so that it's separated in time and our brain is not necessarily making that unconscious association. If someone says to me, I take my melatonin or I take my magnesium and I'm asleep in 3 minutes, it's not the melatonin or the magnesium that did that. It is the oh God, I'm now I can sleep because I've done my thing that I have to do in order to sleep. That helps that person sleep.
It's fascinating, Tracy, and because it's also, I think, the expectations, and you mentioned it a lot when we first spoke, these sleep expectations, and that will come into children's sleep expectations. And I do it before bed. If I don't put the magnesium on Lucas's legs, I put it on every night, and then I'm like, well, you should go to sleep. Like you should be asleep now. Like you shouldn't be causing a fuss. So, I'm not that unfair. And then last night he wasn't settled in, and I was sorry for the picture, but I was in the bath, and then I was like, oh, I didn't put the magnesium on his legs. You know, it's my expectations I'm putting on him as well. And I think that comes in a lot with parents and children. You know, it's bedtime now, you should sleep. You've had this much sleep for babies in the day, you're ready to sleep. And it's expectation as a whole is a huge topic. But it's really interesting.
I look at
It's a
sleep
balance.
and love as being very similar and very dissimilar to everything else. That the more we try to force it and control it, the more likely it is to backfire. But if we can set that stage psychologically and biologically with like doing all that really important stuff about looking after your body and nourishing it well and moving it and all of those things, really, really important. I really think that that glucose management thing is such a low-hanging fruit thing that affects so many people, because so many people's diets are not optimal or really far from optimal. So we can't control it and force it, but we can set a stage that it's less pressurized, I think.
Yeah.
You know, and that's where that expectation of that, oh, I have to get 8 hours or else the sky is going to fall. It's not a helpful way to approach fixing sleep.
It's about support, isn't it? Kind of all these things can help to support the sleep picture and not having that attachment to it. Absolutely, Tracy, I kind of get that especially in high anxiety clients, that could add into the picture of sleep issues almost. I believe from memory, and I'd have to double check this, but from memory, many of the minerals can be absorbed better in the evening. So sometimes that's why, you know, and often you can spread dosages through the day is often something that I would recommend. So yeah, I can take one in the morning, but you can also take, you know, something at dinner and before bed.
I love that.
So it's sort of spreading that dosage, allowing it to kind of then filter in through the day. There's not a particular association between, oh, if I take the one in the morning or the evening, whether that has that impact. So being quite more relaxed about it, absolutely, especially with those high anxiety clients, completely.
Janie, I also wanted to very briefly touch on the fact that you're a yoga practitioner and you've been doing it for quite a few years, I believe. And I wanted just to sort of ask you about that. There's obviously not just the nutrition, it's also about activity, sport, what you're doing as well in the day and how that affects your sleep and your sleep quality.
Absolutely. I think we touched on kind of the, you know, the waking and getting the sunlight, and it is there is research around doing sort of some morning movement, and that doesn't have to be massive exercise or big workout, but going out and getting a walk or doing some sun salutes, you know, at home, or doing a little bit of stretching. Or one of my other favourites is a rebounding, so our little mini trampettes, or going on the kids' trampoline if you haven't got your own one. So making it fun and just getting the body moving can be really helpful, and does have is researched to have positive effects on sleep and sleep quality. So yes, I've been practicing yoga since my early 20s, and yoga was a huge part of my own recovery journey from the post-viral chronic fatigue picture. It was one of the things that I did. I ended up quitting my full-time job that I was in IT, that just was not helping me at all to recover and get well. And I went off and did my yoga teacher training course in Mexico by a beautiful lagoon. So it was definitely the start of my healing journey for a month. So yoga itself, the practices, there's also research around how that's really helpful for the brain and help to reduce anxiety and encourage positivity in our brain and our thought patterns. So that's now researched, and it's brilliant. It's kind of, I've been doing this stuff for years, and now the science is kind of backing it up. I mean, the yogis have been doing this for years and thousands of years, haven't they? And it's worked really well in the East. So what I love to bring in to my sessions with clients, and it's very bespoke to the person, and obviously nutrition is part of the focus, but what other tools can help, and our breath, we've touched on it. I think Tracy has touched on it. Our breath really helps to get us out of our minds. It helps us to reconnect body and mind, and it can be as simple as taking 10 deep breaths, but you're really focused on it. And you count each breath, and every time that your mind goes off, you start again at number 1. So you've done 10 deep breaths of real focus, and observing that inhale and exhale. There's many different techniques, the basic deep breathing, taking a nice deep breath in and pausing, and then a really slow and longer exhale can be really helpful. And again, that pause at the end of the exhale can be really helpful. We don't allow those pauses, so the breath helps us to, and by pausing the breath, we kind of pause the mind as well. So it's really helpful for the anxiety picture. And one of my absolute favorites I love is something called, it's Nadi Sudhi in Sanskrit and in the yogic terms, or alternate nostril breathing. And it's so simple. You make a fist, you release your thumb and your last two fingers, and you use the thumb to block off the right nostril and the ring finger to block off the left. And you just alternate. You breathe in, exhale through one nostril, inhale through that nostril, switch, and exhale through the right. So you can slow the breath down, you can do the 3-part breathing as part of it, but the Nadi Sudhi breath actually helps to balance the nervous system, and it does something also to the brain waves. Tracy, you might be able to expand on this. There's different brain waves, alpha, beta, delta. I don't know if that's something you do in your work, but we have to be in one of those to support good sleep quality, and I can't remember which one it is off the top of my head.
So just to jump in there, Janie, I was learning about this the other day, and the alternative nostril, it also forces the oxygen up through your brain and then out, whereas if you're just breathing in and out, it's not necessarily all going to your brain, because you're obviously, if you slow it down, you'll and do longer breaths, it has the opportunity to, but it actually sends it, if you think really crudely, up to your brain and then comes back out, so it forces that up. That's what I learned the other day, but not the finer details.
That's wonderful. And I think that just the nervous system balancing, and just by focusing on your breath rather than excuse me, being distracted on the expectations of sleep, you're focused on something really positive you're doing. So breath work, absolutely key, and do that before bed can be really, really helpful, just kind of bringing everything down and back into your center, and to help let go of the day. And
I absolutely love body scanning as well. Like I'm very lucky because I can sleep anywhere and I'm gone within any moment. But if there's something stressful, the body scan is the one thing. Just that, as you said, the awareness of the body and removing yourself from the thoughts of the day and what else is going on, and just thinking, yeah, that's my forehead, and yeah, that's my shoulder, and oh, that's my knee. Hadn't thought about that for the last 20 years. Amazing.
Coming back in, and that's a yoga nidra practice, which is the deep relaxation, and there's so many of them available online for free, yoga nidras. So if someone's struggling to sleep, 10, 15, 20-minute yoga nidra, doing that body scan, focus on the breath, just helps to kind of come back again into your body, and not up here or out there.
I'm a big fan of breath work myself. I had an event that I had to do this morning at 7:30, and I had to log into someone else's Zoom account to run the event, and it asked for an authentication code, and I was like, oh, how am I going to reach this person? I was literally like, shh, like, what I really need right now is just to take 1 minute, bring myself back here. Can't force the person to respond, and then I will be in a much better place when I do get into the event. I use it regularly, not necessarily for sleep, but just to kind of get out of that space when you find yourself caught up in, I guess, feeling really rushed and really pressed. It's like nothing really is that important. We make it important, but we can slow down and be better prepared for things if we can get back into our body and get out of our negativity bias.
I use EFT. I don't know if that's something you guys know about, but I use that a lot for my son. If he's upset and stressed out, or can't sleep, I do tapping, and it takes 5 minutes, and then he really falls to sleep straight away.
So how would that look then, Sinead, in that situation, if you had an issue with him and he couldn't get to sleep?
So you know, if he's had a bad day, or originally I was using it on myself because obviously I'm in people's homes. It's always really, really alien the first few shifts. I'm nearly always in someone's front room. There's always a camera on me, so I'm always really conscious, and it's very hard to relax in these situations. And there are times between baby feeds that I can try and sleep. And I started using it then. Somebody shared a 5-minute YouTube video with me, and it is just tapping various spots on your face, and you just do it rhythmically. But I think it's the concentrating and the breathing that actually does the magic.
And the
And I can
awareness,
sleep now. Yes,
bring your awareness back to your body and your body's
absolutely.
needs. And yeah,
Exactly that. And then with my son, when he's upset, so they also say in this video to rate the emotion you're feeling. So if it's frustration or anger, you rate it out of 10, 0 being not upset and 10 being really upset. And I always ask him to rate how he's feeling. And it's always like a 8, 9, or 10. And then at the end, after 5 minutes, I do it on him. He's 7. He could probably do it by himself by now, but he doesn't remember the ritual. And by the end, he's always like a 2 or a 3 and asleep within a minute. So it's very, very calming.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I love, and a lot of things. I mean, we could like, there's so much stuff. I've got so many questions I still want to ask, but we're going to follow our format. Otherwise, we will really digress. But just one thing, a few things that have been mentioned. It always then brings me back to the techniques that you've touched on and we all know about for babies. So the breath, even shh, 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 that is using your breath to calm, to create a, you know, a balance. The tapping, we talked about tapping bums, or, you know, it's just amazing. You just,
Those are all bring you back to the uterus, don't they? And how, you know, your heartbeat and everything.
yeah.
And they try and create all these toys and teddies to mimic us. But yeah, they just love that reassurance. And
That
yeah,
links
no,
into white
all the
sound, doesn't
tapping.
it? That even as adults,
Perfect.
we are listening to like water on a tent or a Hoover. Some of this, you know, adults have these apps as well to go to sleep, right? We haven't really touched on that, but that's, you know,
Yeah.
that same thing that, you know, is that familiarity and that ritual.
I've got a friend who throughout the winter as well will sleep with a fan on
Yeah,
because
I
of the
do.
noise. Yeah.
For the noise. Yeah, I love sleeping with a fan on, not for the air, but for the noise. And when I'm at work, I do recommend white noise, although they are saying now there's some negative impact, but I find it drowns out the baby's shuffling and the small noises like the grunting and stuff, which obviously eats into the anxiety of like, oh, should I get up? Is it feeding time? Should I start waking mum? All of those things. So for me, if it drowns out those tiny little noises, I always recommend new parents have white noise for them, not really for the baby.
Can you do it for
Just
your
to drown out
husband
the
as
small
well?
noises.
To drown out the husband
I'm the
snoring
snorer
and
in
his
my
grunting.
family, so
So
So I'd like to just close with one last question to all three of you, really. And I just wanted to ask if you could give one piece of advice to every household when it comes to sleep, what would it be? Start with you, Sinead, if you like.
oh, I'm not sure I'm ready. I need a minute to think about that one.
Okay, anyone else want to add anything?
I'll start. I think from the
Yeah.
nutrition side, absolutely learn to balance your blood sugars for you and for your children, and learn the foundations of your foods, and then breathe.
Amazing. Tracy, any thoughts?
I would say a really easy, safe go-to is that if your sleep is starting to wobble a little bit, do not check the clock in the middle of the night. Knowing what time it is does absolutely nothing in terms of being able to help you sleep in the moment, and it will only raise your anxiety around sleep.
and that would link nicely into not having your phone in the room, because how many people, okay, I guess if you don't have your phone, but how many people now have bedside clocks because they're so reliant on their phones? I actually need to go the other way, which might not help with checking the time, but you know, don't put that don't check your phone to check the time because of the brightness as well.
Any thoughts, Sinead?
So for me, I would say it's just getting the feeding right during the day, because then the night naturally kind of happens on its own. So if you're breastfeeding, then feed on demand, especially in the early days. And if you're bottle feeding, feed on demand as well, and just try and learn their cues, because then they'll naturally start to sleep a little bit longer at night.
And I love that, because it all comes back to what you're learning about your baby, that you then need to continue to learn and be aware of as an adult for your own sleep and wellness and cycles and, you know, balanced needs. So that's a wonderful close. As I said, I've got loads of more questions, but I'm conscious of our time, so we might need to one day do a part 2. How much it comes up in the other areas. Just I'm not going to, but is napping. I would have loved to have got more into, and across different cultures, and sleep quality. You know, people might not have an issue going to sleep, but actually like how they feel when they wake up, or you know, that rested. So I think there might need to be a part 2 one day. So if any of our listeners are keen on that, they can.
I'd also be interested in psychology, why some people potentially are better sleepers and others are not, just from the beginning, and where that comes from. That's another longer discussion.
And final one is, you can tell my enthusiasm for the subject is, why can't I wake up in the morning? Why? Like, that's why
I can.
Yes, I know you can, Penny, and you know I can't, because the void in our messages in the morning is such a big one. Penny starts at 5, and I'm maybe starting to reply about 7:30, 8.
Yeah, and the other one, if you're married to someone who has a totally different circadian rhythm to your own, which is my case, so I will jump out of bed and my husband will still be there like a stone, and then he's up until 2 in the morning, and I just want to be asleep by 10. How to deal with that? Another interesting one. So thank you so much, Sinead, Tracy, and Janie, for joining us today and sharing all your wisdom and insight. Thank you so, so much. And as always, keep informing those perspectives and take care of yourselves, especially when it comes to rest. Thank you, ladies.
Everyone. Have a lovely day.
Very much.
Bye.
Thank you.